In 1975, a black pastor from a small Mississippi town vanished without a trace during the height of civil rights tensions, leaving behind only whispers and fear. But 20 years later, a construction worker renovating an old building made a chilling discovery inside a sealed wall. What he found would finally expose a conspiracy that had been hidden in plain sight for 2 decades. David Washington, now 38, stood in the cramped kitchen of his trailer home on the outskirts of Magnolia Springs, Mississippi, staring at the stack of unpaid bills on his table. The morning coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to move. 20 years. 20 years since his uncle, Reverend Samuel Washington, had disappeared without explanation, leaving David's world shattered at the age of 18. The phone's shrill ring cut through his thoughts. David hesitated before answering, recognizing the number of Magnolia Springs General Hospital where he worked as a maintenance supervisor. "David, it's Carol from the hospital. We need you to come in early today. There's been an incident at the old Mercy Medical Building downtown, the one they're renovating. The construction crew hit something in the wall and, well, they found something that doesn't belong there." David frowned. "What kind of something?" "Just get down here. The police are already involved." An hour later, David stood outside the abandoned Mercy Medical Building, watching police tape flutter in the humid Mississippi breeze. The 3-story brick structure had been empty for 15 years, but the city had finally approved funds to convert it into affordable housing. Detective Maria Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying temples, approached him. "Mr. Washington, I'm Detective Santos. Thank you for coming down. Carol said there was some kind of discovery. What does this have to do with me?" Detective Santos gestured toward the building. A construction worker was removing interior walls on the 2nd floor when he broke through into a sealed space. Inside, they found what appears to be a makeshift room and some items that might be connected to your uncle's disappearance. David's breath caught. "After all this time?" "We need someone who knew Reverend Samuel Washington to help identify what we found. The worker who discovered it is pretty shaken up. His name is Tommy Rodriguez. He's been doing construction around here for 30 years, but he's never seen anything like this." They entered the building, climbing creaky stairs to the 2nd floor. The hallway smelled of dust and decay. In what had once been a patient room, a section of the interior wall had been torn away, revealing a hidden space about 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. Tommy Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 50s, stood nearby looking pale. "I've been doing demolition for 3 decades, he said to David. "Never found nothing like this. That wall wasn't original to the building. Someone built it special to hide this room." David peered into the hidden space. Emergency candles sat on a makeshift shelf, their wax long since hardened into grotesque shapes. A folding chair faced the wall where someone had scratched desperate messages into the brick with what looked like a nail or piece of metal. But what made David's knees weak was the familiar brown leather jacket hanging on a nail driven into the wall, and beneath it, a small wooden cross on a chain. The same cross he'd seen his uncle wear every day of his life. "That's Uncle Samuel's jacket," David whispered. "And his cross. I remember when he got that cross from his mother. He never took it off." Detective Santos made notes in her pad. "Mr. Rodriguez, can you tell us about the construction of this wall?" Tommy nodded, glad to focus on technical details. "This interior wall was built to look like part of the original structure, but the mortar's different, newer. I'd say it was constructed sometime in the mid-1970s, based on the materials and technique." "Could someone have been kept in here?" David asked, his voice barely audible. "Sadly, yes," Tommy replied. "The room's got ventilation. See those small holes drilled near the ceiling? Someone could have survived in here for a while. There's evidence of a makeshift bathroom setup in the corner and food containers." Detective Santos pointed to the scratched messages on the wall. "Can you read what your uncle wrote here?" David stepped closer, his heart pounding. The scratches were faint but readable. "Day 6. They say they'll let me go if I sign the papers. God give me strength to resist. Below that, Day 12. Samuel Washington, pastor of New Hope Baptist Church. If something happens to me, tell David I'm proud of him. Further down, Day 18. I can hear them talking outside. They're planning something. Lord, protect my congregation. He was held prisoner here, David said, anger rising in his voice. Someone kidnapped him and kept him locked in this room. Detective Santos examined the space more carefully. Mr. Rodriguez, would it have been possible for someone to access this room from outside the building? Tommy pointed to a bricked-up window. That window was sealed from the outside, but recently, you can see the mortar's even newer than the wall construction. Originally, someone could have climbed in from the fire escape. We'll need to examine everything for DNA evidence, Detective Santos said. Mr. Washington, I know this is difficult, but we need to know more about your uncle's situation in 1975. Were there people who might have wanted to harm him? David sat heavily in a folding chair that had been brought up for the investigators. Uncle Samuel was complicated. He was fighting for civil rights, but he was also trying to keep peace in the community. In 1975, tensions were high. The Klan was active, but there were also black power groups who thought he was too moderate. He paused, remembering. But the biggest conflict was with Magnolia Springs City Council. Uncle Samuel had been pushing for integration of public facilities, and he discovered that federal funds earmarked for community improvement were being diverted. He was planning to expose corruption at the next city council meeting. Detective Santos looked up from her notes. Do you remember who was on the council then? Mayor Franklin Pierce. He was the main opponent. There was also Councilman Robert Hayes and… David's voice trailed off as he remembered. Judge William Morrison. He wasn't on the council, but he had a lot of influence, and… David's eyes widened. Dr. Charles Whitfield. He owned this building. Mercy Medical was his private practice. Tommy Rodriguez had been listening intently. Dr. Whitfield? I remember him. Real prominent family. When did he stop practicing here? Right around the time Uncle Samuel disappeared, David said slowly. The building's been empty ever since. Dr. Whitfield said he was retiring, moved his practice to Jackson. Detective Santos and Tommy exchanged glances. Mr. Washington, we're going to need you to come to the station and give us a detailed statement about your uncle and the people you mentioned. This is now officially a criminal investigation. As they prepared to leave, David noticed something else in the hidden room, a small notebook wedged behind a loose brick. Detective Santos carefully extracted it with gloved hands. More of his writing, she observed, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with his uncle's distinctive handwriting, documenting his captivity day by day. Day 1. They grabbed me outside the church after Wednesday night service. 3 men in masks. Brought me here in Dr. Whitfield's car. I recognized the license plate. They want me to sign something giving up my fight against the city council. Day 3. Dr. Whitfield came today without his mask. He says if I cooperate, they'll relocate me to another state with money to start over. If I don't, I'll never see David again. Day 8. I can hear construction outside. They're building something to make this room permanently hidden. Lord, I don't think they ever intended to let me go. David's hands shook as Detective Santos read aloud. Day 15. Food portions getting smaller. Water too. Dr. Whitfield says the city council voted to drop the corruption investigation. He wants me to sign a confession saying I made false accusations. The final entry was barely legible. Day 20. Very weak now. If anyone finds this, know that I never signed their papers. David, be proud of your heritage and fight for what's right, but be smarter than your old uncle. The truth will come out someday. At the police station, David gave his statement while Detective Santos coordinated with the medical examiner's office. The hidden room was being processed as a crime scene, but after 20 years, physical evidence would be limited. Mr. Washington, Detective Santos said after they finished, I have to ask, Dr. Whitfield, Mayor Pierce, and the others you mentioned, are any of them still alive? David nodded grimly. Dr. Whitfield is in his 80s now, lives in Jackson. Mayor Pierce died about 10 years ago, but Judge Morrison is still around, still has influence in county politics. We'll need to approach this carefully. These are prominent people, and without your uncle's body, building a case will be challenging. What about the notebook? His testimony? It's evidence, but not the same as physical proof or eyewitness testimony. We need more. That evening, David sat in his uncle's old study, which he'd preserved exactly as it was in 1975. He'd kept everything: the books, the sermon notes, the civil rights pamphlets, even the half-finished letter his uncle had been writing to the NAACP about municipal corruption. Looking through his uncle's papers with new purpose, David found something he'd never paid attention to before: a carbon copy of a letter his uncle had sent to the FBI just days before his disappearance. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the letter began. I am writing to report systematic diversion of federal funds intended for community development in Magnolia Springs, Mississippi. I have documentation proving that Mayor Franklin Pierce, in cooperation with local business leaders including Dr. Charles Whitfield and Judge William Morrison, has been redirecting money meant for public housing and education into private development projects. The letter included specific dollar amounts, dates, and account numbers. At the bottom, his uncle had written, I fear for my safety in pursuing this matter locally. These men have the power to destroy my life and possibly end it. I am providing this information to federal authorities in hopes that justice can be served even if something happens to me. David's pulse quickened. He called Detective Santos immediately. Detective, I found something. A letter my uncle sent to the FBI before he disappeared. He was documenting federal corruption charges. Can you bring it to the station tomorrow morning? This could change everything. The next day, Detective Santos explained that she'd contacted the FBI regional office. They're sending an agent down to review the case. Federal corruption charges don't have a statute of limitations, and if your uncle was killed to prevent him from testifying, that's a federal crime. Special Agent Patricia Coleman arrived from Jackson that afternoon. A sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in civil rights-era cold cases. Mr. Washington, your uncle's case fits a pattern we've seen throughout the South during this period. Local civil rights leaders who got too close to exposing municipal corruption often disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. She spread photos and documents on the conference table. We've been building cases against several networks of officials who used their positions to steal federal funds during the 1970s. Some of these people are still alive and can still be prosecuted. Agent Coleman showed them a thick file. Based on your uncle's letter and what we found in that hidden room, we have enough for search warrants. Dr. Whitfield's property, Judge Morrison's files, and the city records from that period. 2 days later, the warrants were executed simultaneously. At Dr. Whitfield's Jackson mansion, agents found a file cabinet in his basement containing documents that should have been destroyed decades ago, including contracts showing payments to construction consultants that matched the timeline of the secret room's construction. More damning was a handwritten note in Whitfield's personal calendar from August 1975. SW problem resolved permanently. Room sealed. Notify Pierce and Morrison. Judge Morrison's files revealed bank records showing payments to the same construction company, along with correspondence about handling the Washington situation. But the most shocking discovery came from City Hall. Hidden in a misfiled box of old municipal records, investigators found the original federal funding documents with forged signatures and a memo from Mayor Pierce to his co-conspirators. The Reverend won't be a problem much longer. Whitfield has a solution. Dr. Whitfield was arrested at his home, initially denying everything. But when confronted with the evidence, the 84-year-old man broke down. I never meant for it to go that far, he sobbed in the interrogation room. We just wanted him to stop causing trouble. The plan was to scare him, get him to sign the papers and leave town." Agent Coleman leaned forward. "What happened in that room, Dr. Whitfield?" "We kept him there for 3 weeks, trying to get him to cooperate. But he wouldn't give up, wouldn't sign anything. Then Pierce said we had to make it permanent, that Washington knew too much to ever be released." "How did he die?" I stopped bringing food. Pierce said it was the only way. We couldn't shoot him or anything obvious. Had to look like he just disappeared." Whitfield's voice was barely a whisper. "I was a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm, but I let that man starve to death." "What did you do with his body?" "Pierce had connections with the crematorium. We moved him at night, said it was an unclaimed body from the hospital. The ashes—" Whitfield broke down completely. "We scattered them in the river." Judge Morrison was arrested the following day. At 78, he maintained his innocence until shown the evidence, then also confessed to his role in the conspiracy. The story broke in the Jackson Clarion Ledger with the headline, "Civil Rights Pastor's 20-year-old Murder Solved. Prominent Officials Arrested in Corruption Cover-Up." David stood in New Hope Baptist Church for the first time in 20 years, addressing a packed congregation that included many who had known and loved his uncle. "Uncle Samuel died because he wouldn't compromise his principles," David said from the same pulpit where his uncle had preached. "He could have signed their papers, taken their money, and lived. But he chose to die rather than betray his community and his faith." The church had organized a memorial service, even without his uncle's remains to bury. The entire community came, black and white, young and old, people who remembered Reverend Samuel Washington and others who only knew his story. Tommy Rodriguez, the construction worker who'd made the discovery, stood up during the service. "I want to say something. I've been in construction 30 years, and I can tell you, that wall wasn't meant to be found. It was built to hide that room forever. But God works in mysterious ways. The city chose our company for that renovation, and they assigned me to that specific wall. I don't think that was coincidence." After the service, David walked to the Old Mercy Medical Building, which had been designated as a historical site. A plaque now marked the location where his uncle had been imprisoned. Agent Coleman joined him there. "The federal corruption case is moving forward. We've traced over $2 million in diverted funds. Dr. Whitfield and Judge Morrison will spend their remaining years in federal prison." "What about the crematorium connection?" "We're investigating, but after 20 years, it's difficult to prove. Pierce took that secret to his grave." David nodded, looking up at the building where his uncle had spent his final days. "At least the truth is finally out. Uncle Samuel would be satisfied with that." As the sun set over Magnolia Springs, David made a decision that would have made his uncle proud. He'd been offered a position as community liaison for the federal investigation, helping to identify and recover other diverted funds from the 1970s. "I can't bring Uncle Samuel back," he told Agent Coleman, "but I can continue his work. There are probably other families out there who never learned what happened to their loved ones. If Uncle Samuel's death can help solve other cases, then maybe his sacrifice wasn't in vain." 6 months later, David Washington stood before the Magnolia Springs City Council, the same body that had once conspired against his uncle. But this was a new council, elected after the corruption scandal broke. "I want to propose establishing the Reverend Samuel Washington Civil Rights Memorial Fund," David announced, "using the recovered federal funds to finally complete the community improvements my uncle died fighting for." The proposal passed unanimously. As David left City Hall that evening, he thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A construction worker's routine demolition had uncovered a 20-year-old crime. His uncle's hidden notebook had provided the key testimony. The FBI letter had connected the dots to federal charges. But more than anything, it was his uncle's refusal to compromise his principles, even facing death, that had ultimately brought justice. Walking past New Hope Baptist Church, David could almost hear his uncle's voice in the evening breeze, preaching about faith, justice, and the long arc of history bending toward truth. The building that had once housed Dr. Whitfield's practice now bore a simple bronze plaque. In memory of Reverend Samuel Washington, 1930–1975, a man who chose truth over life and whose courage continues to inspire justice. 20 years later, the truth had finally set them all free. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. It truly means a lot. If this story gave you chills or made you think, hit that like button to help more people discover it. Let me know in the comments. What part of this case hit you the hardest? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you know someone who's into strange, haunting stories like this, don't forget to share it with them. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next mystery we unravel. Every like, comment, and share helps support this channel and keeps these stories alive. See you in the next one.